In the name of God, in this session I want to review the session 6, 7 and 8. In the discussion of the Hindi data in 15 and of the Spanish data in 17, you can refer to such data. We observe that distinct sounds may occur in the same phonological environment when they serve to contrast utterances. It may happen that distinct, phonetically similar sounds may appear in the same phonological environment, not contrast utterances. Here we can see this process in this data. We have three allophones of P, which is plain P, aspirated P, and unreleased P. This square bracket in the both sides of the sound show the phonetic representation of that word. Here you can see the environment which this P can come after the C, after the C, after the C, intervocalic environment between the two vowels, which the second one is unstressed. Here we have again two vowels, and at the end of the word trip. Here we have other type of P, which is aspirated P, which comes at the beginning of the word and between two vowels. Between two vowels at the first of the word and at the end of the word. And here we have unreleased P, which comes in this environment. These three allophones of P are in a complementary distribution in this environment. In this environment, these allophones of P are in complementary distribution, but they have the shared environment at the end of the word, which they don't create any definition and meaning. To the two allophones we consider in one, we have added a third unreleased stop P here. This diacritic means unreleased. We find the unreleased allophone in word final position and before another consonant, according to this data. If we now contrast a chart of the occurrences of the allophones, we obtain such a table, which this plain P comes at the end of the word after the C and in intervocalic environment when the second vowel is unstressed. But about the aspirated P, which comes at the first of the word, at the beginning of the word, at the end of the word, between two vowels when the second one is stressed. And about the unreleased P, which comes at the end of the word, before the consonant, but they are in complementary distribution in such environment. This environment at the beginning of the word, after the C, before the consonant, intervocalic environment, but they have the shared environment at the end of the word. We call it as variation, and here we don't have any differences in meaning between these three kind of trip. They have the same meaning. If we read down the environment column in 28, please pay attention to this point that they don't create any meaning, because it is very important, because we can separate it from the process which we had about the photo and furrow, which was in overlapping distribution. We find that all three allophones occur in the word final environment. This resembles the situation we found in 18 Spanish, where reading down the column representing the intervocalic environment, we found that both trill re and flap re occur in that context. And in the Spanish case, we had two words which were entirely different. Furrow means from, and furrow means leaning, but here we have they are in the same meaning. They come in their meaning. They share their meaning. In contrast, reading down the word final column in 28 here reveals three occurrences of the same word, which is trip. Always means trip. Pay attention to this point, it is very important. Whether the final stop is pronounced with a normal P, separated P, and the unreleased P. This is known as the free variation. Here, the care must be taken in interpreting charts such as 18 and 28. It was about furrow and furrow. If I think it is about furrow, and it is about trip. The discovery of two or more entries in a single column representing a particular environment reveals a contrast only if the entries are different words. If they are variants of the same word, it represents very variation. Okay. Here we have the definition of very variation, in which that the discovery of two or more entries in a single column representing a particular environment reveals a contrast only if the entries are different words. If they are variant, here is the definition of variation. If they are variants of the same word, it represents very variation. We still say that the three allophones whose distribution is shown in 28 form a single phoneme whose members are in complementary distribution in most environments, but in very variation avoid final position. Okay, it is the definition of very variation. Here we can see other examples for very variation, which is about the K, which has the same process as the P. I just briefly explain this data because we explained them before. We have the plain K, aspirated K, and unreleased K. According to this data, we have such a table, which this plain K can come at the end of the word, after the C, and between two vowels when the second one is unstressed. This diacritic means unstressed, and this diacritic means stressed. And aspirated K, as I told you, these two square brackets shows the phonetic representation, and this H show the aspirated sound, which occur above each sound. That sound is aspirated, which comes at the beginning of the word, like cat, at the end of the word, like bag, and in the intervocalic environment when the second vowel is stressed. Other type of K, which is unreleased K, which we have it at the end of the word, like bag, before the consonant, which is act. Here once again we have the shared environment between them, which they are in very variation in the case of the word final position, and they are the allophones of just one phoneme, and they don't carry definition in meaning. Other type of in the case of the alveolar stop, we have other allophones, which are allophones of T, which is plain, aspirated, unreleased, re and e. These two are very different. You can see its table, and the environment in which they can come. Here they are in very variation. Just in four of them are in very variation with each other. You can see its environment. I read it explanation. The alveolar stop, which is T, has a more complex distribution than the labial and the velar as before, like P and K. Here we have two environments where more than one allophones appear. 4 allophones are found in word final position and 2 are found before a consonant. But in each case there is variation rather than contrast in this environment. We can see safely analyze T as a single phoneme now with 5 allophones in complementary distribution and variation. Okay, pay attention to this data please. These allophones are in complementary distribution in this column. Here, 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 and here. These 5 allophones are in complementary distribution in this column, but they are in variation in 2 situations, which is at the end of the word, a plain T, aspirated T, unreleased T, and glottal stop are in variation with each other at the end of the word, and also this unreleased T and this glottal stop are in variation in this environment too, before the consonant. Here we have two kind of distribution. One of them is complementary distribution, which occur in this column, this, and this. And here we have two variation distribution at the end of the word and before the consonant. Okay, 5 allophones in complementary distribution and variation. Okay, the variation, 4 of the variation occur at the word final and 2 are found before a consonant. Here we have variation and here we have variation. Okay, about the phonological rule and notation. The most common format for phonological rules is given here, which I told you that this type of rule is common in generative phonology. Pay attention to this point, that this type of rule is common in generative phonology. And when you want to find such a rule, you should search these phonological processes based on the generative approach to see such a rule. This is read A, which can be all kind of the vowel, or which stands for all kind of vowel and consonant, becomes B, and even B can be all kind of consonant and vowel. After the slash we have a slash, and after the slash we have the environment, which here we have P, and P stands for all type of consonant and vowel. And about Q, it is true that it is the stand for the consonant and vowels. And we say that A becomes B in the environment of preceding P and the following Q. A and B must each be a single segment or a class of segment defined by distinctive features. In one session I should explain the distinctive feature for you, as developed later in chapter 3. P and Q can be any segment or boundary, or a sequence of segments and boundaries. P and Q can be any segment or boundary. P and Q can be any segment or boundary, or a sequence of segments and boundaries. Here we can have, for example, the sign of the beginning of the word boundaries, like this. Okay. Either P or Q or both may be left unspecified, in which case the rule applies regardless of what materials, if any, appears to the left. If P is unspecified, right if Q is unspecified of A. Term A is referred to as the input here. We consider it as input. Term B is the structural change. And the expression P and Q is the environment. Here in this line is the position of the sound which can occur in this environment. We consider this as environment. To illustrate, let us see how we can write phonological rules to account for some of the allophones we have discussed so far in this chapter. Here we can see such a rule according to some examples. For example, in Farsi we took the voice trill re as the basic form and said that it appears as a voiceless trill in the word final position after a consonant, like here. The statement that the basic form is re, which is trill re, is equivalent to stating that re appears in all environment in the basic or underlying representation. Here it is underlying representation of the language, and that the phonetic form of this phoneme is determined by context. Here if we have the name of this rule is RD voicing in Farsi, which in input or underlying representation we have a re, which is trill re, and it is voiced, and it becomes voiceless. This diacritic at under the each sounds is show the devoiced sounds. Here we have the devoiced form of the trill re in this position after the consonant and be at the end of the word, like chat. It comes after the consonant and at the end of the word. Means umbrella has the underlying phonological representation with chat, with the voiced re, with the final voiced re. We can then derive the phonetic form. Here it is a phonetic form by applying the rule. This works as shown in 35. Okay, here you can see its derivation. Our input or our underlying representation is chat, which, as I told you, we show it in this way, that we have at first we have a slash, after that we have the word boundary, and we have the word chat, and the word boundary sign and the slash. Therefore, for underlying representation, we have the input of that word here, which is chat. We consider it as a raw data, and we don't have we consider the form which doesn't apply any rule on it. We have two slash and two word boundary sign at the both sides of that word. After that we apply rule 34. Here we should have 34, which is the voicing of re, and in phonetic representation, which we show it in this way, we use we use a square bracket instead of slashes, which it comes chatter. We call this process and this the step which we show the applying of the rule, and we have underlying representation and phonetic representation. We consider this all as a derivation. The first line shows the underlying representation, which we represent it in this way. The succeeding lines show the result of applying one or more rules to this representation, and we consider one line to each rule. Conventionally, only the items changed by each rule are shown on such lines. The final lines here shows the phonetic representation after the application of all relevant rules. The other allophone of re in Farsi is the voiced flap re, which appears in the environment between vowels. Here we have our flapping in Farsi. Our trill become our flap between two vowels. Here we have its derivation, like shirini means pastry, which we have the flap form of these sounds by applying the rule of flapping. Here we have the underlying representation of that word, like shirini, which at first we have trill re between two vowels, and when this trill re occurs between two vowels, it becomes the flap form of that re by applying this rule, which is the flapping. And we have shirini at the phonetic representation. And here we have other example, which is parameter, means parameters. Here we have we apply two rules. One of them is the flapping and other is the voicing. The rule order here is not important, but sometimes it is important. We have parameters, underlying representation. We have the voicing rule and the flapping rule. And at the phonetic representation, we have such a word. The rule order is not important. I should remind it again. Other common types of phonological processes are in this way. Some phonological processes occurs commonly enough to have acquired descriptive names. In analyzing the exercise, it is always best to look for such processes first before proposing a rule of a complementary different nature. We discuss some of these processes in this section. One of them is assimilation. In assimilation, a sound changes to become more like a nearby sound. In assimilation, a sound changes to become more like a nearby sound. For example, in the French data of 5, the uvular fricative is realized as the voiceless kh following a voiceless sound. Another example is about the plural morpheme of se, which is pronounced ze after the sound like ge, which is voice, dogs, and cows, because they are the voice sound, and this se can take the voice feature from this nearby sounds and become ze. But here in cat we have cats, because t is voiceless, and we have the s form of the plural morpheme. And here we can say that we have assimilation, but assimilation is not necessarily between the immediately adjacent sounds. Sometimes we have some assimilation like vowel harmony, which it occurs between vowels which are not nearby each other, regardless of the intervening consonant between them, which I told you, which I give you example about the Persian bero, which it turns to boro. Other is dissimilation, which is opposite of assimilation. In dissimilation, a sound becomes less like the neighboring sound. For example, we had the suffix thick, which is fricative, this se. After the fricative sound, like se, he, fe, which are the similar we say in the manner of articulation, it turns to te, which is different from this sound and is plosive. Therefore, we have assimilation. Other process is lenition. Lenition means weakening, and lenition can cover many other processes like dilation, like fricative processing, and other type of processes. And assimilation is kind of lenition too. It generally refers to a reduction in the degree of structure in a sound, roughly along the scales 13. 30. We have, when we want to produce the consonant, we have a structure and we have a stack front of the air. And in lenition, the structure for some sounds is very high and sometimes it is weak about some consonant. For example, the stops, for a stop we have a complete structure, but about the fricative we don't have the complete structure. Therefore, for lenition, we say that we can move from the sound which has the strong structure towards those who have the weak structure. Like here, that stops are lenis when they turns to flaps, and flaps became lens when they turns to fricatives, and fricatives can be lens when they turn to approximant, and at the end when we have delete some sounds, we consider it as a lenition, and is more lens than these two. That's this manner of articulation. And other feature which we consider for the lenition is voiced and voiceless. The voiceless aspirated when turns to the plain voiceless became lens, and we have lenition again when the plain voiceless turns to the voice sounds. Here we had some example. We had such a word, ori, kami, and tana, and sukuri, which they became lensed when they combined with each other. Origami, this k, which was plosive, turns to which was voiceless, turns to it voice pair, which is ge, origami. And in other example we have origami dana. Here this k at first was a k, which this k became voiced, and we have lenition here. And here again tana turns to dana. This t became de, and it become voiced. And we have three type of lenition here: ge, de, and ze. At first it was se, which turns to ze, and we have lenition, and we consider this feature: voiceless sound, plain voiceless, and voiced. Other feature, other process is fortition, which is opposite to lenition. As I told you that lenition occurs at the end of the syllable and at the end of the word, and in the intervocalic environment. The common environment for the lenition process is end of the word, end of the syllable, and in intervocalic situation. But for fortition, which is opposite to lenition, The common environment for fortition is the word initial position, and before the stress vowel we have fortition. Here, for example, the approximant turns to the alveolar. Y turns to J, which we have fortition. Other process is insertion, which we called it as epenthesis too. In insertion or epenthesis, we add a segment to facilitate pronunciation. For example, it is true about the English, the phonological form of the plural morpheme of Z, which sometimes in some words we have insert the vowel E between that plural morpheme and that word, like horses, which here we have is buses, bushes, churches, and judges. We have the insertion of E before the plural morpheme of Z. Because we want to facilitate the pronunciation, we insert such a morpheme, and we can show the sign of insertion in this way. This show the deletion, and it becomes A, for example, which is insertion. In deletion, which is opposite to insertion, we have, for example, we dropped sounds. Like in French, many words final consonants are dropped if the following word begins with a consonant or at the end of the phrase. Here you can see it, which in deletion, for example, the B becomes deleted, which we show it in this way. Okay, here we have some example before vowel, before consonant, and phrase final. Here we have petit ami, which we have T at the end of the word. But here we have, before the consonant, we have petit garçon, which we deleted this final T before the word which begin with consonant. And again here at the end of the word, we delete it. Il est petit. And it is true about other consonant. Gros ami. Here we have vowel at the beginning of the following word, therefore we keep it. Gros ami. And here before the other consonant we have gros, garçon. We deleted it because here we have the consonant, and the following word begin with consonant, and at the end of the word gros we drop the Z. And it is true about others. Troupe, étroit, taureau, large. Here we deleted it. C'est taureau. Here we delete P again. Thérèse, étroit. We have here we keep Z because the following word begin with vowel. And très large, intérêt. And sometimes in some words we have both deletion and insertion. Here we have deletion in such a word in the British dialect of the English. Ba, sa, fia, pag, homa. At the end of the word we deleted re, but when we add suffix like ing, we can pronounce that re. Burying, soaring, fearing. But sometimes in some data we added some sounds like re to some words. For example, here we have so and lo, which they don't have any re innately in this word. But when we add some affixes, some suffixes to this sound, to this word, like ing and other affixes. We insert the sound like re, soaring, but in Italy we don't have any re in this word. Or lure and order. Other process is lengthening, which in Russian vowel length is allophonic. It means that it don't create any differences in meaning. Stressed vowels are longer than unstressed vowels. It is a rule that stressed vowels are longer than unstressed vowels as a whole. For example, the stressed u, ruki, which means hands, is longer than unstressed u, ruki, of a hand, which here we have a stressed e. As I told you, this sign, this diacritic show the stress. And here we have a stress e, but here we have the unstressed e, which they make the differences in meaning. And here you can see other example which we have differences just because of their lineation. Os and os, bone, mouse. Hic mean here, hic mean this. Porta mean gate in ablative form, ablative mood, and we have porta mean gate in nominative form. And here we have other example in this language. We have before the sequences of ns and nf, we have the length vowel. For example, here we have in humanus, which this e is not a length one, but here because we have such a consonant cluster ns, and according to this language we have the length vowel before such a cluster. We length this vowel, which we show such the length as by this sign, the two dot in sanus. And here before the this cluster nf, inflix. This sign show the length. Complementary lengthening, compensatory lengthening, which is one type of lengthening which it occurs from the deletion of a consonant. Sometimes we delete a consonant, and for compensating that deletion, the vowel is lengthened. For example, casnus, which by deletion of this c, we have canus, mean gray. Here we have compensatory deletion, compensatory lengthening. Or casmis, which is camis. Or fideslia, which is fidelia. In this language, in this dialect, the deletion of c is common. Shortening, which is opposite of lengthening, while the vowels of English b and beat have roughly the same length, the vowel of beat is shorter. In general, a vowel is shorter before a voiceless consonant than it is either word finally or before a voice consonant. Therefore, in the word final position and before the voice consonant, we have the length vowel. But we pronounce the vowel before the voiceless consonant as a short vowel. For example, here we have right, which we have short vowel, and right, in right we have length vowel. These two words are same, but for the t and d. Again, for writer and rider, here we have the length vowel, and here we have the short vowel. As I told you, we had some problem with the phonemic analysis. One of that problem was about the neutralization. I told you about two problems, which we solved them in the generative phonology. The theory of phonological analysis that divides language sounds into contrasting group is known as taxonomic phonemic. In taxonomic phonemic, we just classify and taxonomy the sounds. And since it provides a taxonomy of the sound of the language. While this theory can offer considerable insight into the phonological structure of language, it has inherent limitations. This limitation can be overcome only by a more sophisticated form of analysis, which is generative phonology. One of the problem was here. Here we had trill ray and flap ray in some data in 17 and 19. Because this segment contrasts in the intervocalic environment, phonemic theory assigned them to separate phoneme. Once this assignment is made, phonemic theory doesn't countenance a rule governing this distribution. Rules in phonemic theory can only state the distribution of the allophones of the phoneme. They cannot substitute one morpheme for another. Nevertheless, the occurrence of the trill ray in word initial position to the exclusion of the flap ray appear to be rule-governed phenomenon. But the slogan of phonemic is once a phoneme, always a phoneme. And it creates some limitation for this theory. And this allows a rule expressing this fact. A second serious limitation of phonemic theory is its inability to deal insightfully with the very common phenomenon of neutralization. By neutralization, we mean that whenever two or more distinct underlying segments have the same realization in a particular environment, like allophones of English T, which we say that it has 5 allophones, which one of them was flap ray. But the flap ray is also an allophone of the voiced stop D. As in the case of a Spanish trill ray and flap ray, there are environments in which T and D contrast, for example, at the end of the word, like heat and heat. But if a participial suffix is added to each of these, heating and heating, the words are pronounced the same. They will be the differences will be neutralized T and D, and they turn to just one sound, which is flap, which is one kind of the allophones of T. While phonemic theory commonly employs a branching diagram such as one we gave in 3, which here we have the repetition of this in 39, to illustrate allophone where a phonemic unit branches into 2 or more phonetic units. But a taxonomic phonology and doesn't allow the diagram in which a single phonetic unit is connected to 2 or more phoneme in 15. Here, this diagram is common in phonemic theory because we have 2 allophones which are related to just one morpheme. But here the problem is with this diagram, which we don't have problem with this T and D, but we have problem with such a flap ray, which is related to T and D at the same time. But in phonemic analysis, we say that one allophone is related to one morpheme, not one allophone related to 2 morpheme. It is not common in this theory, and it couldn't solve this problem. Therefore, here to solving this problem, we consider other level, which was morphophonemic, which in morphophonemic we show it in this way, which we had double slant line, and we try to by showing the morphophonemic level to solve that rule. And here one morpheme related to it, one allophone related to one phoneme, to solve the problem of this theory. And here we have the second solution with the phonemic theory, which to give a phonemic status on its own in this way. But in generative phonology we don't have such a problem, because we can show the changes of the word step by step. Please read this, look at this review, and review this three last session, and ask your question. Please, I try to solve them. Thanks.